Cool. Hi, and welcome to the Land Down Under Hangout. Tonight's book is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Guin. I picked this one because it has been on my to-read list for quite a long time, and it turns out there's no time limit on how long you can go back and decide you want to review a book. So, yeah, I'm just going to ask for first impressions. So, Mel, you're first on my screen.
Oh, lucky me. So this was a reread for me, and this time I did it on audio instead of reading the physical book, even though I had the physical book itself. And I actually found that an improvement for me. So whether it was because it was in audio format, I had just grown as a reader, or it benefits from a second reading, I don't know, but I enjoyed it better than I did the first time round. So that was a good thing for me.
Cool. Matt.
Oh, how did I get second? Now, I actually have not finished the book. I'm at 50%, so I'm literally halfway through. And this is my first Guin. I've never read any of her work before. So far, I wouldn't say it's been a slog, but it is certainly not being an easy read for me. So that's probably got some bearing on why I'm only at 50%. Although Kirsten tells me there's some more interesting stuff that's about to happen, not far away from where I am. So yeah, I'm a very plot-driven person, and like plot-wise, it's moving a bit slowly in the first half. So there's some stuff coming, I believe, that's going to be moving things along. But I probably won't have a whole lot to say about it at the moment. But I'm happy. I'm obviously here and happy to hear any and all spoilers. So don't anyone hold back. I'm not concerned about that. So I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts as well.
It's amazing. Matt said he doesn't care about spoilers. I think he's been replaced by an alien.
Yeah, I think so too. I was just thinking the same thought.
Normally, I don't care about spoilers, but he's like so vigilant about them. But
look, outwardly we look the same, but I'm actually just an envoy from another planet.
I like
Cool.
it. I like it.
Next on my magic grid of people is Barbara.
Oh, all right. I'm about 50% of the way through as well. And actually, Matt, my experience is very much the same. Maybe I'm enjoying it a little more, the style, because I've read diplomatic notes. That's what it, so I'm like, oh, I'm back at uni a little bit. Because like when I was doing my master's, it was in international relations and communication. So we got to read a lot of diplomat notes and reports. So I'm like, I've not actually read a science fiction book that was written that way, so that's kind of fun. It is a bit slow plot-wise though, like, so yeah, and for me, I can't deal with the audio version. I tried it, and if I could have had the audio, I would have been done. Because I've got other stuff I have to be doing right now with dealing with the shipping container that's arrived and whatnot. I haven't finished it yet. And I can't have my husband read it to me because he's a soothing voice and I fall asleep. So I'll still finish it. I don't mind the spoilers. I'm happy to be here for that.
Cool. Elizabeth.
Yeah, okay, so this was my first time through, not my first Le Guin. She's not one of my favorite writers. I find her to be, she has some quite interesting ideas, and that was definitely the case here. But I find her language and expression is not particularly emotive, and it tends to hold me a bit at arm's length. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't think she's ever going to be a favorite writer of mine, however interesting her ideas are. But yeah, on the other hand, there were parts of this. I mean, I found this a lot more enjoyable than The Dispossessed, for example, and I kind of got some interesting, like Frankenstein / Polar Explorer vibes for a while there, which was super interesting, which I enjoyed. Plus also I thought it was interesting to see kind of some of the impact that it's had on literature that's followed it, and I'm thinking particularly of like ancillary justice. So yeah, looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks.
Cool. Kirsten.
I also am only halfway through, but this is a reread for me. So I read it not that long ago, a couple of years ago. I intended to finish this one, but I've been sick this week, so it didn't happen. I'm a little bit further ahead than where Matt is up to, because I was like, have you got to the bit where this happened? And he was like, no, that sounds more interesting than what I've been reading. So, but yeah, I agree with you, Elizabeth, about the lack of emotion. Like, I would like to talk about that more, actually, because that was something that really stood out to me on the reread that I don't think I really had put my finger on the first time I read it. But the second time going through, I was thinking, God, this character is not reacting the way that I would react in this situation like this. Yeah, but we'll talk about that a bit more. But yeah, I have been enjoying rereading it, but I just, especially like the last little bit that I've gotten up to where things have started picking up plot-wise, I've been enjoying more. But yeah, I've been sick, and usually I was doing the audiobook, and because I haven't been at work the last couple of days, I haven't been driving to and from work, so I haven't had my audiobook time, and my brain hasn't been in a kind of space. So I will still finish the reread. I'm not going to give up on the reread, and I don't mind about spoilers because I have read it before, although all I really remember from the second half is a lot of camping.
I think that's it.
So I'm like, snow camping. That's the thing that was in my head. Lots of snow camping.
Yeah, it's accurate.
But yeah, yeah, I'm cool with spoilers and stuff because I have read it before. So yeah.
Cool. Kim.
This is my first read. I usually hate politics in books. I usually will just like skim over everything, but she actually managed to keep me interested enough that I didn't feel like, dropping it and throwing it across the room. I did intend to just read it slowly this week, but I had to read the whole thing in 2 days, so because my week was not what I expected it to be. So it does have some interesting points. It was written so long ago, I think there's going to be lots to talk about, so we'll get into that.
Cool. Sarah.
Yeah, so much of what everyone said here is very much on par with what I'm thinking. I wrote here, so far I'm a third of the way through, and I would DNF if it wasn't for Guin and me wanting to say that I've read something from one of the godparents of the genre. That's kind of how I felt. Like I was like, if it wasn't for this group, it would have gone on the shelf. And it's interesting what Elizabeth and Kirsten were saying about the language, because I said here, I think more around I'm finding the languages difficult to pass, new words versus existing words, like the choice of like the world building, the choice of the word earth instead of the word that they had for the world. Like there was things like that where I found from a mod, like from a sci-fi perspective that is like, I don't know, 40 or 50 years on from this, it's built on top of this, like how far we've come, or we've evolved that. So there was sort of like, oh, okay, some push and pulls and my sort of modern day bias to it. But I also had here, I think it's mostly because the characters are not yet compelling to me. They are reserved from their own world and their own stories. They're observant of their lives as opposed to being in it. And what was interesting is that I thought as it went on for Estravan, is that their name?
In the audio they say Estravan, but
Estravan. My Spanish is not great, so I knew it had kind of a Spanish look to it. Estravan is kind of reserved from their world, but Genri, I just couldn't quite like Genli. Yeah. I found, it was just kind of curious. And it was interesting what you said there, Kirsten, about lots of camping, because I got to that whole section, which, Matt, you're not up to yet. And I just went, what does this book want to be? I feel like I'm on some Arctic adventure, like, has anyone seen Touching the Void? Because that's what I felt like I was in, was when people got stuck down a crevasse on Mount Everest. That was what I was like, what is this book? We were here and now we're there. So I kind of was like, there's lots of really interesting ideas here. I'm I guess having to remember to be more forgiving of it because it was trying out new ideas, and and I have such a I guess a modern bias to it that I have to kind of remember, like, this is a godparent of the genre of what people have built upon ideas, and it was at a very when wrote this is a very different time as well, and sci-fi, as she said herself, reflects what goes on in the time around you. So I thought that was really interesting. Looking forward to getting into it.
Cool, and that's all we have time for. No. Okay, so I picked this. It has been on my shelf to read literally for over a decade. I read The Dispossessed about 20 years ago. I found it jarring, but wonderful in the ideas it presented and the way it presented the ideas it did through fiction. But I found this a lot easier to read. At the same time, this was first published in 1969. Having read a lot of the other golden age of science fiction writers around that time, this is so far beyond it in terms of language and lack of bias. It was jarring every time I hit one of those, to the point that I didn't, and then I had to stop and think, actually, that was probably deliberate, because it was helping the story along. Or maybe it wasn't, but it has also shown me how much so many of my favorite authors have cribbed from this writing style. So for people who have taken the same style and then written 1,500 page books on it, this one came across as very short and ended very quickly. But I actually really enjoyed it, if only for, even if I did find it, I do have strong opinions about some of it. The language in particular just drives me insane. But for that, I think there are two books that Ursula Guin wrote on this. One of them referring to this, another one written decades later, then critiquing her own thing. So I think that she's probably spoken better on that than I have. I could, but no, I really liked it. One thing I am going to bring up, because it's not going to come up for the rest of the book, is that Ursula Guin was born in Berkeley, California. When this book was written, she lived in Oregon. I think there's a whole subtext about the book about Oregon winters being really, really cold.
And I had to say that actually Oregon winters are not cold.
Are they wet? I mean, really miserable. Yeah.
California, yes, they're going to feel cold, but the way this is described, they're not like that.
Okay, so she was hyperbolic about it, but it was definitely reflective of something.
I was just like, this is like my nightmare. I could not deal with this world. I would be like, sorry, I'm going home. Too bad.
And Matt's sitting there going, it doesn't sound that cold.
I've heard that maybe, people who come from like Southern California and they try and relocate to Northern Oregon or up into Washington State or even up into British Columbia, there is this like West Coast chill that they talk about, and that's the social chill where like people, if you can get them to have a coffee with you, then you're best friends and they're really warm and lovely. But if you can't break that first layer, everyone comes up as really cold. We don't smile at each other on the sidewalk when you walk around. You just kind of go on your own way. So
I feel like this is kind of reflective of the society that is portrayed in the book in some respects.
And in fact, I would actually argue like that's reflective of the first society that they're in, but the second society that they're in later reminded me very much of what it was like being in Japan, where everybody was always so very to your face, welcoming and how wonderful it is, but you never really got to know them.
Yeah, I think that the juxtaposition of the two cultures was pretty deliberate and pretty brutal. Okay, so I figured that from here people would have very strong opinions on that they wanted to share. Sarah, do you want to pick one? Because I think you're the first person I heard that had said that they had so many ideas. So do you want to start pick something to roll with?
Who was it?
Sarah.
Sarah.
Oh, I thought you said Elizabeth, because she also said there were lots of ideas. So, I thought you were building on what she said. I suppose let's kind of go there.
Just go for it, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to look at my notes here. Okay, I've said here the text regarding pronouns is also of its time. You cannot think of a Gethebian as it, lacking the Kardashian human pronoun for persons and soma. I must say he, for the same reasons we use the masculine for a god. It is less defined, less specific than the neutral or the feminine. And then to that I said, which is telling to the times and making a point of inclusion or ticking a box. But in time, it becomes less defined, less specific, even for the neutral or feminine. Actually, I think that's something that put in. Anyway, I thought that was because that my modern day sensibilities that raised my heckles. I'm like, what is wrong with they or them? Right? But I just sort of remembered, and there's actually aspects through it. And I think what I even wrote at the beginning, and I want to see what others thought, is I thought, and I think I wrote something along the lines of, Jesus Christ, I hope Guin goes on some kind of epiphany path about because obviously in the world that Guin comes from, the masculine, even though there was a female pilot that came down, it's like this masculine stuff.
Oh God, yeah.
Kirsten, go. You
stick to the pronouns, stick to the pronouns. There was a point where he said something along the lines of, because they have this and what was it, ambisexual was the word they used, society. Anyone could do any job. And I'm like, is that, could anybody not do any job anyway? Like, yeah.
Every time they mention gender in any way, I was like, oh, this book is old. This book is
yes,
but
but interesting of its time. It's trying. It's like it was trying to explore something that was hard for 1968 when it was written.
Yeah, it is a product of its time. It's definitely.
No. It's not just that. What she's doing is she's trying to show a main character who has those biases. It's not that his society is necessarily like that, although some indications would seem to support it. But it's also the fact that that's the way he thinks, whether or not it is true or not. Although having said that, I think it's really interesting that the passage that you quoted there, Sarah, if you look at the author, it would seem to be a female author, like within the text, if that makes sense.
I mean, there was also this line, which I thought was, because as I said here, Guin is very biased and conservative in his worldview, and yet is an envoy. Lines like, they lacked, it seemed, the capacity to mobilize. They behaved like animals in that respect, or like women. They did not behave like men or ants, which I thought was super, like, as you said, the bias of Guin, but I think it was also that aspect, that idea that I have, which was, if you're an envoy to a different world with different cultures, and there's all these worlds, and this is maybe the first time, like, I guess to our modern day sensibilities of sci-fi and that type of thing, this is kind of, conservative and like, oh, you only found somebody who's
ambisexual was the word they used.
Ambisexual, I just also, there was that thing for me going, how does someone get this job if they are not open to all culture? So that was the first kind of bit for me where I was sort of hitting this wall with this book, where I was going, how do you even get this job? How are you supposed to sit there and convince people if you're not going to, if you, like I said, anyway, that's just my 2023 person who showed up at the beginning of this novel and struggled. I've been talking enough. Other people obviously may have things to say.
I think part of it in this particular circumstance anyway is that the world building itself, because he comes from an environment where the rest of the worlds have all been populated by humans. So even though they are people who are different in this particular world, they are still originally from humans. And so all of the previous ones have been as well. And so there's a lot of, it's not quite how we would normally have written it today, where we would have been, really engaging with them being very different because of different reasons. In this case, we're talking about someone who's coming across a lot of different cultures, yes, but that in the end originated from humans themselves.
Yeah.
And so there's still a lot of that sort of, that element of there's not as much difference. Which I think affects what you're saying there about him being an envoy to these worlds. Why is he not more open? Well, he's coming from an environment where he's envoying to other human worlds where they came from the same progenitors, originals sort of situation. So I think that's part of why he's not as open as perhaps he should be. And this has been really what I would consider, from what he describes, one of their first tests of that circumstance, where they're really having to deal with something that is really pushing their understanding of people being different in a way that they haven't experienced before. And I think that comes into it. Whether he deals with it very well or not, it's a whole other matter.
Thank you for that clarification, because I did not understand that at all. I just understood that there was a, like you said, there was a main thing, but then it all went out, and the peoples of those worlds evolved in different ways, but it sounds like most of them evolved in the same way except for winter. And I missed that completely.
There is a point in this book, about how the first investigators that came out to observe this world believed that these humans were genetic modifications done on purpose, like an experiment. So that's why next.
I remember that now.
Yeah, that's why that's different.
Sorry.
That part of
okay, there was a lot of stuff.
Like they talk about a planet with people with wings and things. Like it's not like the only one.
It's just this was the one that really challenged them. I think it's the way I took that.
80-something worlds in the, what's the name of the Ecumen? We basically just see one and then someone from another one. And so there's from the world building perspective, there's that whole other who knows what, and it's not really important to the book, I guess. But in more modern sci-fi, where that concept of world building has really kind of pushed forward a lot more, it's kind of, I think we're almost trained a little bit to sort of think about things in that way. Whereas I feel like this was written where it's more like, oh, and by the way, there's 80-something different worlds. Cool. Not really important. Let's keep going with the thing. Yeah. That's how I felt. It was kind of like that little niggling thing of I want to know more, but it's not actually important to the story.
Part of that too,
that's not the story.
Because this is actually part of a series which actually does address different worlds inside of it as well. So it wasn't necessary because she was addressing this world in this book of this series.
Right.
Because it's called the Hainish Cycle. This is book 4, I think, in the Hainish Cycle.
Right. Okay, cool.
They're not connected though, I don't think. They're like standalone.
Yeah.
It's just in the same universe.
Yeah.
I was going to say world, and I was like, no, wrong word.
Yeah. Okay.
Can we go back to the pronouns?
Yep.
Yeah. Mel,
I'm very curious. I don't remember, and I know I listened to a lot of interviews with Anne Leckie back in the day when Ancillary Justice first came out, but I don't remember. But I'm very curious as to whether she chose to do she deliberately in opposition to this being he.
I was going to ask the same question.
Surely so.
I assume so. I actually think it works better, but I also know that that's coming from my mentality now as opposed to then, because I feel like the using the she sort of forces you to, even though when you're hearing she, but you're seeing traits that are varying, you don't tend to be so locked into thinking he and being male as much as you do when they say he. At least that's what I found personally. I found she a lot easier to work around. As much as I would have preferred a gender neutral pronoun, of course, under the circumstances, I found he harder to fight against. My own mentality behind that.
Personally, I kept having to go, to turn my brain off from imagining everyone as male. And that probably didn't help by the fact that I was listening to an audiobook with a male narrator.
Yeah.
But I was like, I had to it was like almost work for me to go, don't think of all of these people as male. And it was, and it also made me think about my own biases and going
it's why I won't listen to Murderbot, because
same thing. Yes.
Yeah, I won't, because it's narrated by a particular gender, and that person and Murderbot is genderless. So
and I have issues with Murderbot because I don't like the it pronoun, and I'm like I'm fine with they them, and it is like jarring to me. But I've only read the Murderbot. I haven't listened to the audiobook, even though I normally audiobook, but that's not because of that, it's because I'm cheap.
I did feel a little less guilty about having that male image in my head when Genly says it himself, that he's like, oh, it's hard to not imagine that I've got to remember that these aren't men. In I think 1 or 2 points in the book, they're like, oh, they're also women. And I'm like, they're also not either. But
yeah, like I don't. Yeah, it was interesting that.
But when Genly said it as well, I'm like,
sense.
oh, so even Genly sees them as men.
It's really strange because I actually didn't listen to the audiobook for this, and I kept getting struck every time that Gimli decided like to mention his own gender. I kept forgetting that he actually had one until he just so blatantly drop it in there. I'm like, you prick.
Yes.
As opposed to how his attitude towards everything around him, which was so very obviously gendered, and then it's like, oh, and then I just disrespected them because they were being so feminine. Like, I thought better.
Yeah, that was really.
Yeah. And there's lines like this as well, like burden and privilege and shit. This is, I think, what you were talking about, Kirsten, about how the work is dished out equally.
Yeah.
Like those were some really cool ideas. And there's a name for it, what we talk about here, like equal work, like pay. I can't remember. Anyway, but it was this thing I said, burden and privilege and share is shared out equally. Nobody here is quite so free as a free male anywhere else, which I thought was so telling of its time, which is like, yes, because males in 1968, 1969, they were the only ones who were really free, like
white males.
Segregation had only just ended.
I would
white males, yes, good point.
there's still a lot of, like, especially in heterosexual couples with children, there's still a lot of lack of freedom for mothers because of that. Like for me, when I had our kids, like, even though, Matt could have taken time off to stay home with them, I was breastfeeding and couldn't breastfeed them. So, like, it made no sense for him to be the one to stay home because we did want to breastfeed the kids. And, like, so there is still, like, even now, there's still, like, this onus on, like, I mean, we could have made the choice not to do that, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like
but that's what they address in that particular passage that Sarah's talking about, is they talk about the fact that everybody has the chance of becoming pregnant.
So like,
therefore,
really
everybody recognises the importance of putting that, allowing for leave around that kind of thing, and that it doesn't matter or impact your ability to work over time. It's just something that could be happening in your life. Like that equity that comes from the fact that everybody could have it was particularly it was the best part of the book, in my opinion, really, is that addressing that.
It's really interesting that was one of the things that hasn't really, it didn't seem as aged to me, like this concept that maternity leave was considered to be, such a, it's normal that you're going to need to take time off to look after the children, and the structures that the society had around looking after children, because the burden of it wasn't on one gender. And I was like, well, this is something is still relevant today compared to some of the other stuff that's not aged well. I was like, man, this is still a thing we need to talk about why. And I mean, we've got it pretty good in Australia, but overseas, like in America, the maternity leave situation is pretty dire.
Yeah.
And you can't tell me that it would be like that if we were in a society where anybody could have a baby and it wasn't just one gender that's bearing the children. And it was
definitely the most pertinent point still to today.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
But it was also brought to the forefront of the book a bit because in the societies depicted, there was no leeway. Like, it was, you slack off and everyone dies, or you die because the world is so harsh. Yeah. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, and we can just chuck it at the back of their head. The setting wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that there's been several quotes from this book so far. It's actually from chapter 7, The Question of Sex, which is actually from the field notes of the landing party that came before the first envoy.
Yep.
So if anyone hasn't read the whole thing and doesn't want to, it's only 7 pages long or something. I wanted to bring it up because my quote was almost right near some of the other ones, and which has just told me all I needed to know about Gimli's civilization, which is, one is respected and judged only as a human being. It is an appalling experience. I'm like, well, you guys are dead to me then. Like,
Yeah.
Like, what?
In
yeah,
fact, I would actually argue, where is it? Like, it's one of the things that's particularly hard, I think, when you're reading a book like this, is to understand what is the perspective of the author and what is the perspective of the character that the author is writing. One of the things that she has happen in the story that I find a little bit worrying, that it might have been a bit of her perspective, was what happens around the king. I think it was the king, where the king was pregnant, and a lot of the paranoia and the things that happened around Genly being not being trusted and believed and everything on those lines, and Estraban being exiled, happened because, quote unquote, the king was pregnant.
Hormones,
yeah, it was hormones. And I was like, yes, because it makes you illogical, right?
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I'm pretty sure they said the king was a bit nutty before he was pregnant. So,
there was an element of that.
Pregnant. Sorry, see, it's already infecting my speech.
Yeah, but it was directly addressed that he was worse because of the pregnancy, which is what I really had a problem with. Like, nutty in the first place, but
yeah. I also laughed because that quote you just had there, David, I actually have that too, and I have the first part of it, which is, a man wants his virility regarded, a woman wants her femininity appreciated, and then it says on winter, and I said, they're going, well, that's telling of the time.
Yeah.
I can actually say that one with a straight face, though.
I'm like, yes, so many women really want their femininity appreciated.
Yeah, that's not where I'd go first. But anyway, going back just briefly to the pronouns, which was the quote from that similar section. And Lecky has been on record to say specifically that the Left Hand of Darkness inspired her, and in particular Le Guin's reflections that maybe she should have used she pronouns in the book.
There you go. So
she's like, well, what if I did it? Because she talks about she wanted to write a culture in which gender was not important necessarily, and the Left Hand of Darkness came up as being something that potentially does that. But the use of he pronouns throughout the story didn't really work for Lecky, and obviously it didn't work for bunches of other people, and even Le Guin kind of reflected that maybe she should have made different choices on that front. And so Lecky decided that she would give it a go herself and see what how that worked out.
To be fair, I do give Le Guin credit for the fact that she was publishing in 1969 in an extremely male-dominated genre with male-dominating readers. I would understand that they would have been, even if she had made a decision to go a different way, there probably would have been pressure from editors, publishers, and all of that to reverse that.
And I read, speaking of introductions, which, by the way, I feel should have been postscript, so this is what I wanted to talk about. I refused to read the introductions because I didn't want to have my reading of this book coloured by either Le Guin's opinions, which I couldn't really pass like her book, but China Miéville's, written in 2017. I found that really interesting, and I liked that I read it after. So if anyone has that, it is worth reading it afterwards, because it speaks about Le Guin's reflections. Yep, it's in that version. Yep. What I really enjoyed reading about was that, and I think this also goes to show something of how much more respect I'd have for someone like Le Guin, who evolved her thinking. And she said, I wanted to, women have asked me, wanted me to have been braver. I wish I was, she said, if I did it now, I want to change things. And I think that's really awesome of an author to kind of like reflect and go, I had my own biases and I didn't realize until people opened my eyes. And because she says, she makes a point that China Miéville says, she didn't even occur to her to think about homosexuality. It didn't even occur to her as a thought about, well, what happens in Soma and Kema? Like, is that a thing? Because that occurred to me, but it didn't occur to her. Too. You know, and that she's evolved that, you know, and I think that's really awesome for an author to kind of go, yeah, like I wrote that under my own biases of my world and my own biases of my mind, and you know, it evolves. And she lets, and I also think it's really cool because she said, I leave it standalone as it is, and if you want to learn more and discuss it like we do, it's there for that, which I also think is really cool. So, you know,
I kind of in my mind imagined it a lot like, for those people who know Star Trek, Pond Farm, where they have, you know, theirs is on a bit more of a schedule rather than someone's like playing RNG. But, you know, they get to a point every 7 years where their mating cycle kicks in and they've just got urges. But like, do you have to, you know, is it about conceiving a child, or is it just you're feeling horny and you got to do something about it? So
so it was, I thought that was interesting. I did notice that it's like, well,
does it always have to end in a child or attempting to conceive, or is it?
My impression was that it could just be for enjoyment and not always about a child.
That might not hit the points in the book where they do
Mm.
start talking a bit more about contraceptives.
So
probably
there's no
after the
reason-
halfway point. Yeah.
There's no reason why homosexuality could not have been a thing in this world, but it was
Not really addressed.
You know what I don't think wasn't addressed that's part of all of that, in particular about Kema? One of the statements that's made is that rape doesn't exist. And I felt the scene with the foretellers was particularly telling in that respect, because that was getting as close as they ever addressed to what I think was a sexual abuse, where this character who was going into Kema was trying to influence another character to join them. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem okay. Why are they letting that happen?
They did mention that briefly in that part where they said the closest thing was the word's gone out of my brain. But that they're like trying to
peer
influence
pressure,
someone.
essentially.
Yeah, it was trying
seduction.
to influence someone. Like seduction.
Date rape. That's what I would call it.
It was like,
is that where somebody was
someone does it to
Kema?
they were going into Kema and they were trying to.
No, they were permanently.
there was one.
Oh, that was it. Yes, you're right. You're right. Yes.
Pervert, which was
no. Sorry, I'm thinking of there was another character later who was going into Kema. There was something else that was going on.
Yes, the handsome commensal was trying to bribe Estraven with sex, basically, and he just turned he was trying to turn him. Because he turned female, so trying to turn him, and he just gets up and walks away.
And Estraven really won my respect in that, where they said basically, like, it never occurred to whatever the name was that I just wasn't attracted to them. It's just like I was like, bravo. He's just like, I'm disgusted by you in any state.
Because they talked about him in the previous scenes being very attractive.
Very attractive.
That guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, your honey trap doesn't work on to me. Your personality is contraception enough.
Yeah. Going back slightly to the introductions, if we can. So my version, and I'm sure like the versions other people had two introductions, one by China Miéville and the other by David Mitchell. I thought it very.
I didn't have that one.
I didn't have David. I had.
Who's David Mitchell? Yeah, I had Ursula as well.
More of a literary tradition. What was the movie that the Wachowskis, I think it was, adapted? With all the different people.
Cloud Atlas?
Yes, Cloud Atlas.
Yes, Cloud Atlas.
David Mitchell wrote Cloud Atlas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I thought it really interesting that this particular book should have two introductions by men.
Yes,
Hmm.
that is interesting.
Like you couldn't
Is
get a woman
China-
to write about this?
I didn't
China
know China was a
Mayville's-
guy.
A
I
man,
didn't
yeah.
know that either.
Dude,
It
yeah.
tends to be a female name, but it could be anybody's name. Sorry, that was my bias.
Sarah, I had the same problem until I knew as well. I just made assumptions about China Mayville as well.
He uses he/him pronouns and he presents as male, so I
Yeah.
assume
Okay.
that I assume from there basically.
He is. It's just one of those names that throws you sometimes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bobby.
Yeah, he's not, as far as I remember, he doesn't identify as queer in any way,
No.
but he does tend to write quite inclusive characters, casts, sorry, is what I'm trying to say, not a character, but casts in his books, from what I remember. That might be why they thought he was a good choice. I don't know.
Yeah, it
You
is
couldn't get Anne
interesting.
Leckie in
I was gonna say
2017.
that
You
would
couldn't
be
get Anne
I
Leckie.
do agree. They could have got, yeah.
Well, given this is a 2017 copy, yeah, they could have.
Yeah,
It's-
they could have got Anne Leckie.
The volume with David Mitchell was probably 2019 because it was 20th
Oh, much later than this one then.
Mm.
Much
50th,
later than the
50th.
copy I've got.
50th, yeah.
Anniversary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That explains the differences. Yeah, and I don't think it counts
this
that
is
mine has
2017.
Le Guin. Like it's definitely not two males, but it's still the author. It's not the same as having a female do an intro as well. So
Yeah. What did you think of the intro? Did you read Le Guin's intro, Mel?
I did not reread the intros. I'm sorry. I just did the book. I didn't know we were going to discuss the intros.
No. I think well, just because it was such interesting information in China Mayville's one that I wanted to share, because I was like, oh, now this was interesting. I'm glad I read you afterwards. I tried to read Le Guin's and went, huh? Basically.
Yeah. The
Just-
audiobook only has the Le Guin one.
Okay. What,
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
I was just gonna say, like, China Mayville's introduction was so much more interesting than David Mitchell's. Like, wholly unnecessary. Like, you're not missing anything there.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I did find China Mayville's very interesting, and my questions, which is like, as we've discussed, like I was like, what about homosexuality? What about this? What about, they had addressed those. They talked about it. They talked about the essays that she released, the author released afterwards. So I was really pleased that was there. I actually think, though, I stand by my editing opinion, not being an editor like Elizabeth, that it would be better at the end. That, like, I think it sets
That
the
goes
tone
for
too much.
all
When somebody,
introductions. pretty
right?
much.
Okay, good. Yeah, the thing that so in my version, which might be the same version, Mel, you've got the same version. They put the goddamn calendar and stuff at the end, and I didn't know it was there, and I didn't know it was there until I was like a third. Like, how long have I got? Oh, this is where all the goddamn months are. This is why was
Yes,
this
because I was
at the
reading.
beginning?
Yeah, I'm like, that should have been at the beginning because I got to the end and I'm like, well, this is useless to me now. I'm like, I've gone through the whole snow adventure going,
put it on
what the
there.
hell is he
Have you
putting at
not
the
read
front?
the Hobbit? Put in the goddamn
Even-
map.
You want to know
Like
what's
20
worse?
pages to realize they were days.
Just to give you something that's worse,
Mm.
in the audiobook, they read that chapter out.
At the end,
Yeah,
Of the audiobook.
I was just looking. It's at the end of the audiobook, and I'm like, yeah, I will.
Oh, it's so funny.
But that's so frustrating because in the audiobook, you can't just glance at it and learn something from it. It's like, what's
There's no purpose when you finish the book. Like, what is the point of sitting through these dot points?
I just sat there going, after a while, I was just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. Who cares that it's whatever month? It's all meaningless to me. It's just fucking cold. Who cares?
It's winter all the time, and sometimes it's not. It's a
Sometimes
mild
it's
winter,
mild.
and sometimes it's a really harsh winter, but it's always winter.
Yeah, it was
basically.
like that. Yeah, the Inuit, there's 37 names for snow kind of stuff. I was like, it's like that.
Yeah.
David, you were trying to say something.
I was just going to say I was really lucky because I picked up the paper version, so noticed at the index when trying to figure out where I was at that there was the thing about the calendar.
Damn, I should have read the index.
But they clearly should have like flipped things around so that they had the appendices at the front and the introductions at the back.
So,
That would have been
so
handy.
the version that
I
we
don't
had
think-
actually as Bobby mentioned, doesn't actually have any introductions in it, but it has a single quote from Damon Knight on the back, talking about Ursula Guin. But the most recent one that I've got as an ebook has praise for the Left Hand of Darkness. And apart from The Guardian, The Observer, and The Times, the people quoted are Michael Moorcock, Frank Herbert, Damon Knight, Rob Silverberg, and Neil Gaiman.
See, the only one on the back of this that's quoted is Michael Moorcock. The other one is science fiction, is like a piece, and then it's just Ursula's bio there.
Publishers didn't read the introduction that China Mayville wrote. It's like, let's just get more men.
I agree that that last chapter would have been better at the beginning, and I don't think it's a spoiler. Like, I've had some people sort of say to me, "Oh, sometimes that can be a spoiling thing to have at the front." I'm like, you just skip over it, because reading it at that stage means nothing. But it's good to know it's there, so that when you go into the book, you can go back.
I mean, it's literally just the days and the months. So
yeah, it's nothing.
Yeah,
I know, but some people
help you understand where you are. I think it's the beginning. In the same way, people put a map at the beginning, which, by the way, this could do with. I would like to have known where they were going.
I would like to match. I'm like, oh, this has to be the one book with all this stuff that I want to know where everything is, and it doesn't have a map.
Yeah, want to kind of get a feel for it, you know. Even and that could go at the end, you know, where it shows the journey they were trying to make the old map and what they discovered. Like, could have been interesting. I like maps. Okay, sorry. I wanted to, if David, if it's okay, I feel like we haven't talked about estrogen.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about them because I ended up really liking them, and I think I wrote something that might spark a few people when we started getting their point of view. I said, I'm really enjoying Estroven's point of view. It's poetical, resigned, observant, almost like he is the alien. Chapter 16, between Dremna and Dremgol. God, some of these places sound as dire as they are. A journey entry has been interesting as it is full of adventure, of a sporting endeavour, of travelling and seeing one's world, the great sights. So once we were like with them seeing their own place, I enjoyed that. Like, as I said, it felt like that part of the book, like we were in political, I don't know, no man's land in the first bit. The second bit, we were like, it was kind of cool.
Nice adventure.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super, like it became like, instead of being like a meditation on the nature of man, so to speak, it becomes nature versus man.
That's a good point.
Yeah, like it was kind of interesting in that respect.
And it's not like the reflections on man it stopped entirely. It's just that there was this other element that made it more interesting to read as you went along.
Well,
yeah, they took on
like,
more of a human view and they took on less of a political view than the previous.
It allowed for Genli's like unalloyed masculinity to be highlighted as well, in a way that it wasn't possible in like political machinations so much.
Yes.
Did anyone else find it jarring when they first switched to Estroven's point of view, or is it just the audiobook? Because it took me ages to work out that he was talking, and it wasn't, because it wasn't really very clear to me that we'd switched points of view.
I can't say anything. Because I'd read it before, I was expecting it, so it didn't bother me.
It was for me a bit.
Yeah, I think because we spent so long with Genli in the first part of the book, that the change of point of view was not expected, so it took me a moment to get that there was one.
But I really welcomed it.
Yeah,
me too. Yeah,
I hated being in Genli's head so much.
And it was explaining, and this is where I kind of felt like I got a taste of what people really appreciate about the Guin. Is like, I was like, oh, here we are in a person in their world, and we are starting to understand the world through their interaction with it, not through the envoy, because it was so hard to kind of, they're going and talking to their ex-life partner was fascinating, gather like all that type of stuff, really interesting. I was like, oh, I'm starting to understand more, because Genli was so on the outskirts and kind of, I don't know how to describe it, kind of in the court, as it were, like only ever with, like, not with the people, whereas with Estroven, we were in a workhouse, we were all over the place. I think the only part that I thought was with Genli that was kind of interesting, but it would have been it was when he was with the seers, the four seers, the foretellers. But even then, I felt like we were so kind of removed, but not quite observant enough. Whereas I feel like if we'd been with Estraven, we would have understood a little bit more through them of what was going on. That's just my
Sarah,
thought.
What you're saying there actually reminds me of the Earthsea Quartet, because and the point that you were making before about respecting Le Guin for continuing to learn and develop her points of view, because the original 3 books of the Earthsea were focused on Ged, the wizard, and his coming to power and lifespan and that sort of thing. But the 4th book is where she kind of develops the female perspective, because she had been criticized for focusing, like doing the boy chosen one sort of narrative, and then so she in the 4th book she goes back and brings out the female character of, I think it's the 2nd book, and like talks about what her life was like after Ged had rescued her, and how she comes to power and that sort of thing, and so I like, and you get that mostly from her perspective. So it's really interesting to me that this is not something that Le Guin has done once, but that she is continuing to do, like, across her body of work.
I think that one of the things I noticed when I was reading this is I was reminded about when I read the word for world as forest, which is another one of the Hainish cycles, and how much she writes unlikable main characters as the main voice. And I'm like, why do you keep doing this?
Yeah. And maybe that's the thing, is like we feel more, well, I did as a reader, I felt more emotionally connected to Estraven because Estraven was out making a stand, been kicked out of their home, like was...
Estraven was the hero of this story.
Yeah. Which is why I actually I found their death really abrupt, and I felt like there could have been a bit more time and care spent on that death scene. Like it was all just over so quickly to the point I was like, really? You didn't want to stretch this into a longer, I guess, action scene of what happened and what you saw, and again, that was just, I guess maybe that's just Genley, right? Maybe just a bit too much removed.
I was just going to say that because he was like that with everything, like
and it wasn't until after, I was glad there was grief afterwards, like that started to hit and impact him, but it was just I just felt like Estraven deserved a bit more.
So one of the things I noticed about that specifically was that, he was definitely the hero of the story, because the protagonist certainly wasn't. Sorry, and here even I am gendering them because the language I read the book in. But here Le Guin does something that they also did in The Dispossessed, which they bring a major character as an embodiment of the society they were brought up in. And I think that's really what their role in this is, because you've as one of the subplots almost is the actual political systems of the two nations.
Yes.
Because they're in conflict, and it's taking a point of view just from a bit of a higher angle, but they are actually the embodiment of one of those things, and it is pushed as this is at the end of the day, this looks backwards, but this is the utopia compared to this quite totalitarian state that you've built.
Right, like when you first go to the other one, sorry.
Yeah, so I really do agree, but I think that also it was just, I just noticed more and more that every single even major personality trait and things that they embodied really did come from where they grew up and stuff, even when they were exiled twice over. And they just kept on going. So I really admired that, but I think it was also a reflection of meant to be a reflection of the society. Or I'm just reading too much into it.
Mm.
No, I think, yeah.
I don't think you can read too much into Le Guin. Like, I think she's very intentional about what she does.
Good point. Hey, did anyone else notice that, like, speaking, is it Estevan? Sorry, I didn't listen to the audiobook, so I'm bad with name pronunciation, hence the Oregon thing. Estevan, like, really didn't warm up to Gimli until, like, they were stuck together, you know, in very close quarters for 3 months. It doesn't sound very healthy. Like,
I just thought it was really telling of their character that they still went and rescued him, even when they didn't even really like him at that point. And like the amount that they risked to go and rescue him. I just, like,
I felt like he was sort of responsible for him, and that it was more about that side of things than anything else. Like he even said outright that he felt like that he ended up where he was because of him. But also, I just think overall he felt responsible for him, but also he wanted the ecumen for the planet, and so his goal wasn't. He says it at the end, but it's sort of. He always talks a bit, when he talks politically, he always talks a little bit ambiguously because that's his nature.
Also the society's customs.
What are his problems? Yeah. As opposed to the other one, which is all about the lying and hiding the truth and things, whereas they're more about that sort of more the thin veils and all of that sort of thing. What he cared about wasn't even his country, because he could see the bigger picture. And so his reason and his interest in Genly and his taking responsibility for Genly was around the fact that he wanted the right thing for his planet, which is why he was willing to sacrifice himself, even at the end.
I don't know. I noticed that that was actually explicitly stated as the motivation for the character. But I think that also maybe it's, actually just, well, this is my justification that you might accept for why I did this. I think that they were actually as much a humanist as anything else. That happened to line up with the agenda was probably more like, if I say these words, you'll probably actually understand it. And everyone expects me to be selfish, so here's how you can think of it that way. I didn't actually think, I thought the character was exceptionally selfless, despite seeing themselves as selfish, despite being portrayed as, conniving by everyone else, by many other people and stuff. They just continue to act selflessly in pretty much every regard. I'm sure that there were probably cases where they wouldn't, but I can't think of a single one.
I would agree, though. But even from my perspective, when I was saying that, I was more meaning that it was from a selfless perspective, rather than being for their own benefit. It's because they wanted to help their planet and to get a good thing for their planet, not because he was looking for any particular fame or to win or anything, but he was using his skills at manipulating to make that happen as best as he could.
Yeah, and I got the sense that, in just listening to you talk, David, is shocking ideas, is that, speaking of reading too much into Le Guin, is that they were really the only person who could do it because they'd lived on both sides. They'd seen both sides and neither worked. And they were like, there needs to be a way of everybody kind of coming together. And it's just all these petty land crap type stuff instead of working together. And if we're not cooperating after all this time, then this might be the only way of forcing us to, come kicking and screaming into the, ecumen.
And I think that's true because
besides from supporting Genly, one of the other things he was doing in the earlier part of the book was trying to save the farmers of that disputed land. So he was always out, like you look back on it, you can see he was always out for people's welfare, not just his side or the other, even though there's a whole theme of patriotism running through the book as well. There's several points where she talks about patriotism. You see that he loves his country, but his love isn't just for his country. His love is for humans humankind and not just his country. He loves his country because that's where he grew up, but he doesn't, reserve that for his country and hate the other side.
And I think it ties into the idea of what you were saying before, David, about that they needed to grow and change, and Esteban could see that, but could also see that they weren't getting there because they had this reticence. And I didn't necessarily like this, but this is what I think it was thought, this reticence about war and about actually forcing real change. And so they kept living in sort of the same rut. And so he was thinking that this involvement with the Eckermann might help to bring about some change.
Just not to get ahead of everything, but I just wanted to say that The Left Hand of Darkness and Monstrous Regiment made a really fascinating double bill with some great
totally did.
So
it was awesome. Yeah,
I'm sure we will get to that in our next discussion. But I just
there
wanted
are
to,
moments.
like,
There are moments where I've been going. Oh, but this. Hang on, no, wrong book.
Like,
I'd just like to say, pure chance. It was just pure chance. It wasn't deliberate.
Yeah. But lots of discussion of patriotism and war and gender. Like, it was really interesting. But anyway, please carry on. Actually, there was actually one thing I wanted to say, and that was I found it really interesting, I guess, that Genli should distrust Esteban so much, especially like in the early phases, and should distrust him so much when he like always like falls for whatever anyone tells him just about. He's really quite gullible.
He really is.
So yeah, I found it weird that he should have such distrust for Esteban.
I do get the idea he was very bad at his job.
Yes, and no sense of self-preservation whatsoever, which was annoying the shit out of me, because it's like, even there was a point, I think, when Esteban was like, or maybe I can't even remember who it was that was asking him about how do you call your ship and all that, and he's like not even seeming caring about like having a communication device on him all the time, or having the ability to call, like, I'm here by myself, I'm the only person from my planet here. He didn't seem to be too worried about something that could happen to him.
And it's like 5 years until they wake up on the ship to check in on him, like.
And he's just not bothered by it.
No.
And even when he's in the friggin' truck and they're dragging him off to this work camp, there was like, this is something like you said about emotion, Elizabeth, like there was no emotive language in his like going on in his brain. Like he doesn't talk about feeling afraid or anything like that, or worried about what's going to happen to him. It was just very clinical in like, I was in the truck and I didn't have any water and I was like,
that said,
and there was a dead guy.
Having said that, like that very bold narration of that particular section of the story was very effective. Because it's like it is not colored by like emotion. It's just like, here are the facts of what's going on, and it is horrifying.
I felt like it was a really good example of showing how dissociation would happen in that circumstance.
That's what I was thinking.
Especially writing it as a reflection, because that's the whole point, right? Is he's supposed to be writing this afterwards? And to me, that's you would be trying to disassociate from all of those emotions at that moment, because it wouldn't serve anything in that time.
Admittedly, I had to go back and reread what the hell had happened, because it went from this to that. I was like, hang on, what to work out that like there was the fire, and then I couldn't work it out because it was so removed that I had to reread what the hell had happened, because I was like,
it started out almost you thought he was having a dream, and then you realize this isn't a dream,
that was it.
Actually
that
real.
was it. I was like, is it real or not? I'm very confused. I have to go back.
Until I realized that it was stated that it was a dream, and they just said they never corrected. It was never corrected. Like, it's just like, oh, I had this horrible nightmare, and I woke from this horrible nightmare, and this is what was happening in the nightmare, and it just kept on going.
Yeah.
But having read it a few times to realize, no, actually that was for real. There was no nightmare at all.
that whole section, what that reminded me of more than anything that I've read was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, about his time in the concentration camps. And it's looking back at very similar kind of description of events happening, like and like you said, it said dissociation, like you would have to write about it that way because otherwise you wouldn't be able to write about it, almost like,
I actually think an interesting thing for myself that I realized, like, I deeply dislike Gendley as a character. Do not like being in his head. But one of the things I realized is that a lot of that comes in the beginning because certain things about him that I dislike about myself, i.e. my inability to see when people are trying to hint at things. I'm terrible at that. And also when I get like gender stuff wrong and I'm like, shit. And so all of those sort of things I see sort of myself reflected in him, and that just sort of amplifies everything back. I hate him. And then I think the reason the second half of this book becomes more interesting and something that you enjoy better, because that's what I find with this book. Like the first half, you're just getting through. The second half, you're like, oh, I'm engaged. And a lot of us have talked about the fact that it's partially because, action starts happening there, essentially Men Against the World and all of that. But I also think it's because you start to feel sorry for Gendley after what happens at the camp. And then second of all, you're spending so much more time with Estevan. So you've got that sort of relationship thing going on there that sort of gets you more engaged in them as characters. And so I think that that's got a lot to do with why this book sort of works better at that point.
But Gendley has all their power taken away, like all of it.
Yeah.
They're thrown in this horrific situation, which no doubt is deliberate to have them be a lot more malleable in the camps and stuff. They're basically going from, yes, and I can sit around and hobnob with these people and play games of intrigue, to, well, you're just in a like truck with everyone else for half freezing to death and starving and things like that. Gimli doesn't look so good when their own innate power is taken away, regardless of where it came from. Like, they stop being. They're very aloof about everything. Even after, like, the fires and stuff. Well, they're snatched out of it. Unlike those poor people over there that have to just live and die and aren't trusted because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time without papers. But it's not until it's like, holy shit, this can happen to me. I could almost die. Hey, no one's listening when they're giving me these drugs that could kill me. Wow, maybe my privilege has limits. It's really how I look. So yeah, you can feel sorry for them, but like they really only start to question things when they've lost like the innate privilege that they're asserting regardless.
I think that's a really good way to look at it too, that he has this innate privilege, because I don't think he had any power. That was kind of the point of them going in as a single person anyway. But what he had was this innate belief in himself and what he was doing, that privilege aspect. And so that's sort of how he sort of flies through that first half of the book, where he's just like, I'm doing my thing. I'm here to do a job. I'm just going to keep doing it. I don't care like that. And I think, Kirsten, you were saying before about how he has no concern for his own safety. It's because he's got that privilege aspect.
Even when Estevan basically says, hey, watch out, you're in trouble, these people are not to be trusted and your life is in danger, he just ignores it. And I'm like, wouldn't you have at least a twinge going, maybe he could be right, maybe like
you'd hope
maybe I should be a little bit concerned that I'm in this place, that I saw that whole shit go down when I first got here. And he does actually do this later, where he goes, that was a red flag that I
yes, that's coming to me saying you're going to die. That was a bit of a sign.
That was my first moment of realizing, like that at very early stage, realizing that Gendley and I might have too much in common, and it's one of the reasons I don't like him. Because exactly at that moment, I felt like slapping around, like, pay attention, they're trying to tell you. And I was like, oh my God, it's me. I wouldn't be hearing this.
I think you're being too hard on yourself, Mel. I don't see too many similarities between you and Gendley.
I know that I'm not the same as Gendley. It's just these certain aspects that of myself that I was just like, oh yes. I did want to talk about.
David was saying something that you all talked over.
No. It wasn't that important. I can.
Okay.
I was going to raise something new, so if there's anything relevant, keep going.
Me too, Mel. So you first. It might be the same thing.
It might be. I was going to raise, what did you guys think about the Ecumen's policy of sending down one person by themselves as a way of initiating first contact?
I don't know why anyone would put their hand up to do that shit, but maybe I'm just too.
Actually, that's actually the point I was going to make, was basically right at the end of, it was related. It wasn't the same thing. It says right at the end, the whole point is that they're changed, rather than, that's one of the reasons.
Which you see at the end. Which you see at the end when his people come down. He's like, whoa, they look weird.
I think this is why they send down the noob, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the naive things, all the attitudes and stuff. What's the recruitment process? Let's find the most naive person we can.
Yeah, you have to leave everybody behind because they're all going to be dead.
Drop them into this other planet. I don't think they're in deep sleep. I think they're up there. It's Big Brother. They're like just up there with the popcorn.
I also sat there going, I don't know which one was written first, but I can hear Carl Sagan knocking at the door with Contact, because that was also the thing in Contact where, I remember that. But
I think Contact was the 70s, but I could be wrong.
Well, there you go. Yeah, because I never read it, but I did see the movie several times, and I always loved that scene.
I'll just like to say, as someone who has read the book, don't.
Published in 1986, so that's quite a bit after Left Hand of Darkness.
There you go. So it sounds like Carl Sagan had that whole thing, because there's a bit in the Contact movie where Jodie Foster's character, who Ellie, I think her name's Ellie, is talking to the envoy that she's meeting, who looks like her father, and he says, she's like, well, he says, this is the way it's always been done, and I'm like,
that's actually not the way it's not the way it's done in the book. In the book, there's 5 of them that travel.
It's kind of cool, actually. I like that whole scene. It's kind of cool.
No, in the movie, I agree with you, but in the book, it's entirely different.
So maybe they just leave the Guin.
Back to your original question about the one person and stuff. Like the whole time, it's Guin was just parroting this thing, which is basically, I think it's the best summary of it is one person is like a delegation, 2 people as an invasion. And I think that held up to the point where he just casually drops in conversation amongst heads of government that, I can just call down a ship full of people.
I do like though that they were like, how many people? And he was like 11. They were like, oh, okay, it's fine.
I think most of them were fine, but someone else was like, where's this ship?
It's just up there.
It's just hiding up in where the moon is.
There was one person, I think, in the background that was just quietly losing their shit in that scene.
But what I do find interesting, though, is what they were willing to believe and what they weren't willing to believe. They would be so sort of distrustful and not believing him on certain things, but then he'd say there's 11 people, and they'd be like, oh, okay. And you're like, or even but we're nowhere near you, like we're really far away. Oh, okay. It's like, why do you believe those things, but you're still really distrustful and don't want to talk to us? And when we say that we're not really interested in invading you, we just want to chat.
I think maybe it's they can suspend their disbelief about the big things, but it's the smaller assumptions that are baked into themselves that they just can't even. No one's challenging it around them if they're in a room full of their peers. It's shown in a slightly different way, where with the first audience with the king, where the king is basically, okay, so you've got these people, you're from an cross-galactic civilization with all these planets, and you guys are total perverts and all this stuff. Wait, one of you's black?
One of you's really black.
Yeah, because they keep pointing that out. Other people are black on this planet, but not that black.
You're also a little bit taller than everyone, but you're really black.
I did like that part where he was talking about all the beds are too short because I'm too tall.
Beeping that keeps happening.
I don't know who.
Sorry, I'll unplug.
Are you running out of battery?
It's more the power plug keeps popping in and out.
Oh, cool.
I should
That's
figure out
actually
Don't worry,
something.
I still remember Kirsten's laptop used to tie and take off all the time.
Oh yeah.
What's
That
that
thing with
weird
the shit
whirring
getting this
noise?
Yeah,
Kirsten's laptop trying to
It's like,
take
Is
off.
anyone living under the flight path? Actually, that leads me into what I wanted to talk about, which was, from what I understand, this is not the first person of color that Le Guin wrote, and from what I understand, she was a white woman. And I thought what was interesting for this is that there was this, it's about gender, and then the aspect of this of the protagonist was that they were a person of color, but it didn't matter. And I thought, considering the time, and I wondered if anyone had any perspective on this, but I was kind of like, it should, like, if you were going to write this, then it should matter. I was kind of like, well, why is this there
Maybe
as a
that's
white
the point.
author?
Maybe that was the point, that she wanted it to not matter in the book. She wanted the characters to make it not matter. I think everyone was of some color there. Like he was darker than them, but not dark. Like they weren't white either.
Yeah,
they did talk about there was color variation,
which I thought was interesting. Like, and I think it was the thing of if the gender is something that Genley is having such a hard time about, then as a person of color, I don't know, from that time, that is a big deal. There isn't, any way, especially in America at the time. I just felt, I was just a little bit like, what it felt from a modern day perspective, a little bit like a box tick, but it was kind of a meaningless thing. And I know, like you're saying, it should be pointless, but I was kind of like, going, if gender matters so freaking much in this, then a person's color should also, what impact are we saying with this? What are we not saying with it? Because I feel like you've put it in there, but it's this red herring, and that to me feels very disrespectful of people who are of color.
I think she was doing it very deliberately, like it was a very much a deliberate choice.
But I'm also like, as a white person making these, like that's where I feel.
I realize that.
Yeah,
like it's probably what we would consider today to be sort of going for a colorblind type choice, and nowadays would be considered not appropriate. But I also think that's where the feminism is as well. It's also prior to second wave feminism. And so while there are definitely females that are present, there's still a lot of gendering of those roles in a way that we find deeply uncomfortable nowadays. So I feel like there's that side of it.
I was going to say the same thing, that it's like that colorblindness, like I don't see color, and it's being like, like back then it kind of almost would have been seen as like a liberating like, oh, now it's this new society where color doesn't matter at all, and it's not relevant, and it kind of has almost like decultured people almost. I don't know if that's the right word, but
no, that's right.
Feels like she's trying to do something where she's going, it's this future society where everybody is equal and the color of your skin is irrelevant, but the problem with that is it kind of pulls culture completely out of the and
I almost feel like, I think where I'm hitting this wall with it is I feel like it should have been the other way around. In this culture, gender and color doesn't matter. So the person who, Genley, is obviously having a hard time with gender, it also feels that if this was going to be a thing, they could also have a hard time with the fact that color means nothing in this world as well. And that, again, that would be another bias that they have to get over. If Estevan was a person of color, as well as being, ambisexual, then that could have, and that's probably where a more modern day story might go with it, and really exploring what that, someone who's facing that kind of like, oh, wow, this is, advanced in a lot of ways and its opinions, but not in others. I know there was also, I just think it's interesting. It's also the fact that China Miéville's intro didn't said this isn't the first person of color that Le Guin had written. I don't know if anybody else has written any any of her other books where the protagonists are a person of color.
I'm pretty sure the SC Quartet are all people of color.
100%.
Oh, awesome! I have.
It's been a while since I read Earthsea. Like I probably read it like 10 years ago.
And that's why I was looking for some insight, because I feel like I didn't get any insight into.
It was a common thing that she did across her books, I believe, where she often didn't worry. Like she would have people of different colours and mixed and all of that sort of stuff. I actually think she falls down more in her feminism than she does on her representation.
It's not that there's not representation. It's more that, I think what you said about the colour blindness, that kind of view of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but and to be fair to her too, when I say that I feel like she falls down in feminism, I also recognise that she was way prior to second wave feminism, and so it's not very fair to.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of only by going through that sort of making those creative decisions that we arrive at the perspective we now have, which is like this. While it might be well-intentioned, doesn't necessarily work because it doesn't allow for, culture and all that sort of thing. It takes away a part of identity, but it might have been a necessary step
to get
here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I honestly think like it would be so fabulous if you were doing this sort of literary study to read this and then follow up with ancillary justice. It would just be a beautiful common way to go through these stories.
Because again, all people of colour.
I don't remember
exactly, and cultural elements brought into it.
And culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of because of course the ancillaries still people.
Well, it addresses like imperialism and how that affects cultures and all of that. So
No, absolutely.
But also a much longer story to do all of that.
Yeah,
much more complicated.
And like I said, it's important steps. And as I said, there's lots of really good ideas in here, and I think that's an idea that I feel like she didn't it felt like it was a bit of box ticking, a bit of tokenism, and that I'm like, if it was going to be there, it could have been explored more. And that's where it's like there's lots of really interesting things, and then maybe to my modern day sensibilities, I'm like, if you weren't really going to like dig into that, maybe that was a bit unnecessary.
I think what she was trying to do was envision a future where the color of somebody's skin was irrelevant.
Yeah, but I feel like she dug so much and explored so much of gender being irrelevant in this world. If that was something else, she was going to bring into it, it just became a bit of like a postscript, essentially.
It's possible
which was like,
that it's something she does somewhere else in the series.
Yes.
Because it is a series that maybe are not connected by characters, but it is the same universe where she addressed different things. So I believe that it's been a while, so I can't remember. I did not enjoy the book, but the
word for world is forest.
Thank you. I don't know why I struggle saying that title.
No,
but
that sounds terrible.
That one is a very short read, but if I remember, that one very much delves into colonialism and things on those lines. So I think she addressed different topics and different ones. I haven't read the whole series, so I can't say that. I've only read these two. So I have not read Dispossessed yet, which is part of the series.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for
more
talking about that.
than this one.
Yeah. The last thing
I've got to get to it at some point.
Thanks for discussing that with me. As a whole lot of white people. I wanted to. There was one quote that I actually really loved, and I was like, I don't know if this is the quote on Goodreads that everyone quotes, but I really like this, which was a profound love between two people involved. After all, the power and chance of doing profound hurt. And I was like, it's a John Green quote. He'll quote that one.
Actually, that touches on something that I made a note on, and that was I appreciated the friendship that developed between Genly and Estrovan, and I appreciated the way that kind of friendship was held up over like romantic love or something, in a way that is not often seen, at least these days, in stories. So yeah, that was nice. Like obviously their friendship is a little
Imbalanced, weird.
Fraught, let's say. But they really come together through adversity and that sort of thing.
It makes the ending quite poignant, actually.
Yeah, it does. And just to kind of I feel like there's quite a dearth of books that value friendship over other kinds of relationships in today's society, at least. That I really appreciated seeing that here. Especially because they could have gone like a romantic direction.
And I like that they very directly addressed that Esteban was going into Kemmer, and they were like, yeah, no, not doing that.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Mel,
we've all been there.
Mel, the copy that you've got in front of you, there's some marketing spiel on there. Yeah, because I returned mine to the library. Does it say some? Yeah, okay, you got the same one, Kim. There is marketing spiel about something about it being a love story or something somewhere on it. I'm really annoyed with the marketing spiel of like, and what will ultimately happen. Like it says
like, literally at the end, even finds love. But I think that what they mean by that is because there's different types of love, right?
Yeah, I liked that it was friendship. I just feel like the marketeers kind of were trying to make it
something that it wasn't.
Yeah, and I'm with Elizabeth. I love stories like Thelma and Louise is one of. It's just, it's a story about female friendship. I mean, they also sacrifice themselves and go on a road trip. It's warmer, but you know.
Fried
green tomatoes.
Can I give you my favourite?
Fried green tomatoes. Yeah.
Oh, but no, fried green tomatoes I haven't read the book, but from what I've heard about the book is it's a romance, not a friendship. Like that it's meant to be a gay romance. But anyways, and the movie made it less gay because it was a movie.
I never read the book, so I don't know.
That's why I want to read the book, because I've heard that it's much more explicitly a romance. Anyway, my favorite is The Shawshank Redemption. I love the friendship between Andy and Red, and I just and it's definitely a love story of friendship.
I love The Princess Bride for those same reasons.
While we're on the topic,
here's the conversing.
If you're looking for cross-gender friendship, as the work of Nicole Corner-Stace is quite good for that. I've done Archivist Wasp, which is like a post-apocalyptic. I can't remember. Like, it's definitely science fiction, whether it's kind of verges on science fantasy in places, but yeah, she does male-female friendship, which is that's it, which I really enjoyed.
Nice.
And it's rare. You don't see it very often.
Yeah, you don't. And she is quite committed to keeping that. She said she won't write romance. She wants to write about friendships.
I would also say Becky Chambers.
And Becky Chambers, yeah.
They're more like groups, like that found family kind of thing, whereas like
no, hey.
You mean
Monk and
Monk and Robot. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. The way.
But even in those groups, there's very much it demonstrates in different points the different relationships on a one-to-one basis rather than always being as the group, which I think I value quite a bit as well, because I think that sometimes it's important to recognize how the relationships work differently within a group aspect too.
Agreed.
I've been reading, I was just rereading Murderbot, and the Murderbot are like romance.
Yeah. I just was thinking about Murderbot now.
I want to reread all the Murderbot ones, actually.
Well, now's a good time because the next one's coming out in November.
I'm like, I was thinking about it the other day, how much like I miss reading Murderbot.
I think I'm going to at least reread book 5 before the next one comes out, because I think this next one's going to follow on from book 5.
I'm sorry, I said the M word and dragged us off topic.
Yeah.
Oh, we're always off topic.
We kind of were off topic. Well, we were kind of adjacent to topic with the whole talking about platonic friendships in books. And
I think it is book recommendations.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of what books that I've read that have that dynamic, and there aren't that many of them.
Especially not
Hands of the Emperor.
Especially not across genders.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is a more tricky one to get. Yes.
What did you say? Sorry, Mel?
The Hands of the Emperor.
I don't think I've read that one.
No, but it's very long. It's like 900 pages, so I'm not exactly going out and saying read this. I will, however, say it's more.
Loves long books.
I do.
Yes, that's true, but there's no audiobook version of it, so you've got to read the physical one.
Do the long ones audio.
Exactly, but it is also very character driven rather than plot driven, so be careful.
No, but I love the character. That's me.
I know, but no audiobook. I'm talking for the rest of the group.
I like a good mix.
No, I don't care.
It's a good mix.
Yeah,
good mix.
Was there anything further we had to say about The Left Hand of Darkness before we...
There was one
We're starting to drift.
Yeah, there was one other brief thing, and I just wanted to bring up, because it's like I'm this envoy from this other civilization, and every single time someone asks them a direct question about this other civilization, it's either, oh no, we're not really a dictatorship, or they change the subject and try and dodge the question. It's like, isn't it? So it ends up with situations like, isn't it great you guys have a post-war society? And it's like, not quite.
It's like, well, the group I represent. What about the others? Well, the group I represent.
It's like we just kind of started a theocracy on the basis of this huge war where everyone, let's not talk about that. So about bringing you into the fold. That was about the only other thing.
It's the only element where you really actually felt like Genly had some political skills.
Deflecting. Politicians are great at that. And not actually answering the question.
Let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about this over here. Look at this pretty
thing. You're not talking about me.
This direction. Talking about that until you sign the document.
Yeah.
I think it was telling enough that they wanted someone who was about to be at war, basically, to join the group. So it's like, well, I don't think the rest of the planet's going to be much different.
Yeah. Look, I think end note for me is that I don't think I'm feeling like reading much more the Guin. I don't think it's my cup of tea. I'm glad I read something.
Opinion,
I enjoyed all the Earthsea stuff.
This is, in my opinion, the best of Le Guin. I don't like the Earthsea stuff.
I don't remember it all that well, but I enjoyed it. Like I remember I remember enjoying it enough to read the whole series. Which I wouldn't have done if I didn't like it that much. I don't remember
how much.
Again, she doesn't use super emotive language even in Earthsea.
No.
Yeah. And other characters, because that's what I struggled with until we met Estriven, they kind of also a little bit more removed as well in the other books.
She likes to write valuable characters.
No, I mean more... Like you said, they're not emotive language. Yeah, so if the characters aren't kind of emotionally invested in their own stories and pathways, like with Estriven, it made sense that they were so observant, but Genly was like frustrating. So anyway, that's all just to say I am not feeling that I want to read any more Le Guin. I think I've told you guys, I finally read Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke and really enjoyed it, and I thought it was interesting because he's also got some ideas that sort of throws in, like he's got ladder marriages in there and stuff that really have nothing impact, but it's like I want to show her, a full society kind of stuff. But the rest of it, it's just this big mystery box aspect. So it's always good to read some of the classic godparents of sci-fi, and I'm glad I read Le Guin, but I don't feel compelled to read any more. I've still got to read Octavia Butler, people. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, what was I reading? I was I kept remembering Octavia Butler because I was reading How to Build a Second Brain. And there's a whole like chapter where he keeps referencing Octavia Butler. I'm like, oh, God, now I want to read more Octavia Butler, but it sounds heavy.
That's why I haven't.
Yeah, that's why I haven't either.
You gotta be in the mood.
As someone who
I wanna
has,
read
I
it.
will say, very heavy.
I've read did we read one together? We have, haven't we?
I've read the first one of the ones where the aliens come.
Yeah, there's like 3. That was a gender one as well, wasn't there?
Yeah,
Like,
there was
there
a
had to
lot
be
of gender
3
stuff
in,
because there was it wasn't just male and female, there was another gender. And
yes, you needed 3 genders,
yeah.
basically. Yeah.
What
That's
was
the one I read.
that?
I
And
can't
it was
even-
about repopulating Earth and all of this sort of
Yes.
Parable
bizarre.
of the Sower?
Parable of the Sower.
No, that's not the one.
No.
That's the only one of hers I can think of, but I haven't. I
No,
don't think
that one I believe is more of a time travel one, if I remember correctly. I haven't read it, but I know a bit about it.
That might be
Oh,
the one they've turned into a series on Apple or Prime. I remember I posted it up. One of hers has been turned into a time travel.
Oh yeah,
one.
that's probably the Parable Sower, because the Parable of the Sower is the one that's more well known.
Yeah.
The other one, the one I've read though, is probably the second most known one, and I cannot think of the name of it.
Elizabeth just said Dawn.
Lilith's Brood?
Yes, that's the series,
That's
and it's
the
I think the
one.
first one is Dawn. Yeah.
Yes, I think it is. Yep. just Goodreads her, and that's the one I've got ticked as read. So it was
Yeah.
Dawn.
I have another
There's
one.
Xenogenesis.
Yeah, the
series.
Xenogenesis. That's it. Yes.
So
Lilith's Brood's
Matt, will
second
you
book.
finish? Matt, are you going to finish this book? You're only 50% through.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're ready to go on the
I'm
snow
interested
journey.
and invested enough to finish, and like the stuff that we've talked about and that people have talked about. Like I am interested in reading the rest of it. So I
This
certainly get there.
Definitely
This is
worth
the
it.
other
Yeah.
Lewin that I happen to own. Has anyone read this one? The Lake of
I've
Heaven?
got that one, and I've got the Dispossessed. I need to read both of them still.
I haven't read it yet, but I can't even remember. I think I picked it up. It was cheap or something, and I was like, oh, or it was one of those buy 2 get 1 free books, and I was trying to find a third thing, and I was like, oh, look, Guin, I'll just get that.
Mhm.
But I haven't actually read it yet. So
I'm pretty sure I passed the like political science unit solely on the basis of reading The Dispossessed.
I have a whole heap of those. That's the SF Masterworks, because I have a shelf that I call the Lady Vaults. Fun. Okay. Are we finished, guys? Any other points about the book?
I think we're good.
Okay, so anybody who's joined us, thank you for watching. If you got this far, congratulations. Our book next month is going to be Remnant Population by Elizabeth Moon. We hope we can see you then. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Hey.
Bye.